Hey there, CPO here, and I'm getting ready to go through my pre-maiden check of my Bixler 2 now that it's built. And so what I thought I would do is do a little bit of a video to help new builders, new pilots, kind of go through this process systematically of the things you need to make sure you check before you attempt to fly your plane for the first time. And then a lot of these things that we're checking will also be things you want to check in your normal pre-flight routines. Pre-flight checks are a very polarizing topic. There are some people who are so over-the-top checklist makers that literally they spend more time checking than they do flying. And then there are the others that say, hey, it's a toy, throw it in the air, have fun with it, hope you don't crash it, sort of a mentality. I think the right answer is somewhere in between, but it's going to be up to you, your personality, how meticulous you want to be. So I'm a meticulous builder. I enjoy the process of building and checking things. I will admit, when I fly helis, I'm very meticulous the first flight or two. After that, I do the basic checks, you know, making sure my controls work in the right direction, things like that. I imagine it'll be the same way with a plane. But at any rate, there are some things that you're going to want to check and make sure you have right before you try and fly the first time. I see a lot of videos on YouTube of people doing maiden flights, particularly on the Bixlers. It's a very common plane for new pilots, and I see a lot of crash and burns. I see lots of failed maiden attempts. What I don't know about those situations is how meticulous were they in their pre-maiden checks. Did they check center of gravity, which in many cases I would imagine center of gravity is probably the last thing on their minds. Did they have their aileron directions working right, or the elevator working right, or what have you? So we're just going to go through all of that real quick. I couldn't find a good comprehensive video that showed all of this stuff in one kind of a session. So that's why I'm doing this. Hopefully it's helpful. I'm doing this on a Bixler 2, but this applies to pretty much every plane you're going to put in the air. So right away, I think the most important thing to do when you're done building, you've got all your electronics installed, is get your center of gravity figured out. The way you do that is your manual, or there will be recommendations online of people who have built similar models. There will be a recommended center of gravity point on your plane, which is generally going to be somewhere about 1/3 back, perhaps 1/3 to 1/4 back on the plane. In most cases, your manual is going to tell you where that point's going to be, or like I said, you can find that on the internet. So the manual for the Bixler 2 states that the center of gravity should be about 348 millimeters from the nose of the plane, plus or minus 6. That's great. I will tell you that I've done a lot of research on the forums, mostly RC groups. Thank you all out there. A lot of people have recommended the sweet spot for the Bixler 2 is about 70 millimeters from the leading edge of the wing. So, and that still equates to the guidelines set forth in the manual, but it's just a little bit more precise way of measuring. And as you can see, I do have my Bixler balanced on that point. I know it looks like it's just sitting flat, but it is actually balancing right there. Your mechanism for balancing, you know, use what you want. A lot of people build homemade balancers out of pencils. Mine's a guitar stand. I've showed that in another video. Point being is that you want to get that point balanced with all of your equipment in, everything you're going to do. You should be able to pick up your plane right now and go fly it after checking the balance points. That means make sure the canopy's on. Make sure that the motor of the prop is on. Make sure your batteries are in there. Make sure whatever electronics you want to put into it are in there when you check this balance. Because if it's not, this whole thing is not going to work out, because one thing will change the balance dramatically. Look what happens if I balance it without the canopy. See a problem there? Super tail heavy. It's almost impossible to fly a tail heavy plane, by the way, especially for a new pilot. If you're going to have to go one side or the other, it would be much more preferable to go nose heavy than tail heavy. But either one of them is bad in extreme. So make sure that you have everything in there. My batteries are in there, everything. Now, one of the common probably mistakes, and I could see myself doing this, is thinking, oh, I've got everything in there, and at the last minute, right before my flight, I'm going to pop in my, my little low voltage warning. This thing's lightweight, doesn't hardly weigh anything, wouldn't even consider it as part of the center of gravity checking. But what happens if I just add this weight to the plane? I'm going to go in here, pop off my canopy, plug it into one of my batteries, and just set it right there inside. Look how this impacts my center of gravity. So now I'm a little bit nose heavy. And all I did was put in one more little piece. So get all that stuff in there before you do your check. Now I've got my center of gravity set up without it, which means before I actually do my pre-flight, I want to get this in there. If anything, just staged, right? Get it staged where I want it, and then check my center of gravity. Or I could place it in a position that doesn't impact the center of gravity. So let's say if I put it forward like that, it's a problem. But if I put it on this back battery and set it in right there, secured of course, because you don't want it floating around while you're flying. That's not so bad. It's still a little bit nose heavy. But anyway, so make sure you have everything in there. Another common problem I could see is getting everything all set up, and then right before the maiden flight, you decide, ooh, I'm going to put my fancy 808 number 16 camera on here. Super awesome, lightweight, high definition, some FPV video. Let's just stick it on here. Where do most people stick it? I don't know. Let's do a tail cam. Whoops, look how bad my center of gravity is now. Let's move it up here. Not so much of a problem. Okay, so if I was to stick it right over perhaps the center of gravity point on the plane, I might not have a problem. But people generally will put this on the nose of the plane. Now suddenly I'm pretty nose heavy. Or the tail of the plane, which makes it, essentially, it's going to make it unflyable. So figure out where you want these things before you sort out your center of gravity. And that will save you, I'm imagining, a lot of trouble on your maiden flights. And like I said, I watch a lot of videos of people having failed maidens, and this is the stuff I don't know that they've done. So, you know, some of it's just, you know, pilot error, but some of it could be something simple like missing this critical step in the process. So now that I've got the center of gravity checked, I will show you my reference marks for center of gravity, and you can see here on the bottom of the wing, I originally had some tape. Now that I know exactly where that's going to be, I went ahead and put a couple Sharpie lines there as my reference points for center of gravity. So now I can balance it on those lines, and you know, before every flight, if I make equipment changes or pull out the batteries, because quite frankly, most of my center of gravity adjustment is done with battery positioning. So if I move the batteries, aka take them out to charge, I'm going to want to make sure that I double check the center of gravity before I continue flying. Alright, so that's that. I'll lock in my handy plane holder here. Alright, so now the other thing we want to check is going to be your control surfaces. For this, we're going to want to have the plane powered up with battery power. So let's do that. Alright, I've got my controller. I'm running a DX6i. I have a model for the Bixler 2, if you can see that. So I've got everything there. I have my throttle position down. All my switches are in the 0 position. And my sticks are neutral otherwise. Make sure all of your trims are at center. So you don't want any trim influence here as we look at our controls. So now that my transmitter's on, I'm going to go ahead and plug in some battery power. I'm just going to use one battery here for the purpose of this. And you can hear the startup sequence. Okay. So now I am powered up, and all of my servos should have moved to the center position, which means if I've properly set up my control surfaces, they will all be in a neutral position. which is what I'm looking for. All right, so looking at the control surfaces from the back of the plane moving forward, right now we're looking at the elevator surface. And the elevator, of course, is going to be on a Mode 2 transmitter, the right stick. So I'm looking for a couple of things here. Number one, with the stick in the center position, I want this to be neutral, not pushing down, not pulling up, as neutral as I can get it. Now this is foam, so the interesting thing about foam is these surfaces may not be completely flat. There may be a little bit of flex to them, in which case it looks like I might have a little bit here on mine, because this side is almost dead on. This side, however, looks like it might be a little bit tweaked. But that's okay. We'll have to trim that out when we set up our in-flight trim. But get it as close as you can to level. The other thing is you want to check the proper movement. So we're gonna check the control neutral position at the same time as we check movement. So again, the elevator is here. And you want exactly this control. So when I pull back on the stick, the elevator raises, which is actually going to raise the nose. When I push forward on the stick, the elevator is going to lower, which is going to allow the nose to pitch forward. So make sure that that is in the right direction. That's absolutely critical to get that right. And then make sure when you let go that it releases at the center point. If it doesn't, I would recommend doing the mechanical adjustment of lengthening or shortening this control rod as it goes back to the control horn. So that's how you would adjust it. Later on, when we get into flight mode, we can use trims to make those adjustments. But you want to get everything as close as you can mechanically first. So let's go on and look at the rudder next. Alright, so looking at the rudder, which again, Mode 2 is going to be the left stick, and you want it to go in the same direction you turn the stick. And then when you release, you want it to come back in to as neutral of a position as you can get it mechanically. And that looks pretty darn good there. Alright, while you're here, before you move on, the other thing you want to do is check your control horns, your clevises, make sure everything is nice and tight, nothing's come loose during the build process or post-build, or if this is a pre-flight check, make sure nothing's come loose in flight. But double check all of that while you're at it. There's no point just trusting that that's going to work without taking a good look at it. Let's move on to the aileron controls. Alright, with the ailerons on a Mode 2 transmitter, it's going to be this right stick. Okay, and the direction you want the ailerons to go is to raise up on the direction you're pushing the stick. So see how I push the stick right, the right aileron goes up. If I push the stick left, the left aileron goes up. And the other one will go down, so they're opposites. So that's the direction you want that to work. When you're done checking that and everything looks okay, double check and make sure your control surfaces are all flat and in a neutral position across the back of the wing. Double check your horn, your clevis, everything, make sure everything looks like it's good there. Now we're going to move to flaps. On my transmitter, flaps is controlled by a switch here, which is the flap switch. And as you can see, when I flip the switch, my flaps will go down. And that's the position of the flaps when they're on, is in the down position. You want to make sure that your flaps are moving together. So unlike the ailerons, which are opposite of one another, the flaps move together as one. So if you don't have that action happening, then you've got to find a way to reverse your other flap. So just basically make sure that when the flaps are in the off position, or the zero position, or the neutral position, however you want to term it, that your control surfaces, again, are neutral. Double check your horns, make sure that they're in there nice and tight, your clevises are on, your servo arm looks all good. Just double check all of that, and then you should be good to go there. How much you deploy your flaps is going to be up to you. I would say, first of all, as a beginner, just doing a maiden, I wouldn't even worry about the flaps. That's something to deal with later. But, you know, somewhere between a 30 to 50% throw might be a good place to start. But engagement of flaps will dramatically change flight characteristics. So if you're not prepared for it or you're not comfortable with it, don't do that unless you're 3 mistakes high so you can understand how to react to it. So now that we have all of our control surfaces all figured out, the other thing to do is double check that our motor is actually operating properly and in the right direction. So we want to make sure that our propeller's put on right first. All right, so with the motor mounted on, your propeller should be in the right direction, which if you will go back and look at the quick tip I did on proper propeller placement, you will have that information. But essentially what you want is the thicker leading edge of the propeller to be forward, the cup to be facing backwards, and then make sure your collet is on nice and tight and your adapter and everything looks good there. Then the next question is up to the proper rotation of the motor. Now, if you remember right from my video on getting the motor direction right, you can see this little sweeping edge, which is going to tell you that the motor is going to spin in this direction. So with the plane secure, in this case, my guitar stand works out great because I have these little blocks. So if I apply power, it's not going to go anywhere. But feel free to put a hand somewhere to secure the plane, making sure that your hand is nowhere near the propeller, and just bip the motor a little bit and check the direction. And as you can see, the direction is moving in the right direction for my particular propeller setup. This is a pusher prop, so it's going to run backwards than you would have if you had a standard prop. If you had a standard prop on, you would be wanting the motor to run this direction. So make sure you understand what type of prop you have, and if it's placed on correctly. In this case with the APC, the numbers facing the front of the plane, and then depending on, you know, counterclockwise or clockwise, depending on the type of prop. Just make sure you have that right. Feel free to run the prop for a second, make sure everything looks good. And of course, if it's on right, you'll feel a lot of wind coming back towards you because it's pushing all this air backwards. So just make sure that that all works okay. And that's basically it for the motor and the prop. One more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is checking to make sure that your fail-safe works the way you expect it to. So the fail-safe on this setup, the way I set it up, which is typical, is when the receiver loses connection to the transmitter, the motor will stop, and basically all the controls will be neutral. So how do I test that? Well, in this controlled environment, what I'll do is I'll spin up the motor a little bit, and then I'll turn off my transmitter. If the motor turns off, I know my fail-safe is working. If I turn the transmitter back on, everything's back to good. So when the signal comes back, it will restore. Check that. Make sure you understand your fail-safe, how it's supposed to work, and then how it actually does work with your setup. All right, so you know, for a pre-maiden check, I think that about covers all of the fundamental basics that you're going to want to do on the bench. Now, obviously, when you get out to the field or wherever you're gonna try your maiden, you're going to want to make sure you go out with completely charged batteries, both in the airplane, and don't forget to charge your transmitter batteries. I can't count the number of times that my transmitter batteries have been low because I'm simming, I'm doing setup stuff, I'm doing testing, and I just forget to charge the transmitter. So charge your transmitter, charge your airplane batteries, go out with fresh batteries on all. Make sure you understand the wind direction, where you're at. You want to do your launch into the wind, you want to land into the wind. So if you don't know what direction the wind's going, then you're going to run into problems. Make sure you do a range check on your transmitter and your receiver. So every radio model is different, but there should be some instructions with how to do a range check. Do that before every flight. And then also make sure you understand your dual rates and expo on your radio. So if you don't, go look into that. For a first flight, I may put 70 to 80% weighting on the rates, and I might put a probably 20 to 30% expo just to kind of soften the controls a little bit until I can get it in the air and figure out how it's going to react. And then I can go from there. I'll probably set up dual rates, so with the flip of a switch, I can either raise or lower my, my weighting on my controls. Because what you don't want to find yourself is just completely over-controlling where you're in this situation in the air, and it's just a recipe for getting crashed. You know, and granted, I'm no expert here. I've never put this thing in the air, so I might crash and burn my first flight, but it's not going to be because I didn't try and take every precaution I could to make sure I had a successful maiden. So that's what this video is about. It's about me helping myself understand what I need to do to be successful, but also sharing that information with you, so if it's your first time out, you'll be successful as well. So get your controls neutralized, make sure you understand the directions that everything's going to go, check your motor direction, make sure it works the way you want it to, range check, get your batteries charged, and most importantly, please get your center of gravity sorted out before you throw that thing in the air. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.